Moving on. The name of this argument is Al-Sirab teleological argument, or the Mirage teleological argument. The name gets its influence from a very powerful verse in the Quran, Surah 24, verse 39. You may see the connection in this argument when or if you decide to look up that verse. Now, allow me to list out the premises and conclusion, and then I will explain all the possible objections and their counters. Premise 1. In order to accept that our rational faculties are reliable, initial sensory experiences of the world must be accepted until proven incorrect. In other words, these experiences must be considered default positions. Premise 2. The appearance of purpose, intention, and order, or design, in the universe is an initially sensed experience. Premise 3. Hence, the belief in a designed universe, which automatically infers a designer, is in fact the default position until proven otherwise. Premise 4. The concept of God, a purposeful, intelligent agent outside the universe that cannot be detected by our senses, is the most tenable explanation for the identity of the designer. Conclusion. Hence, theism is the default position until proven otherwise. So now you're probably wondering, how do we make sense of this argument? Is it logically valid? Is it sound? Let's turn to the objections now to see if we have a logically valid and sound argument. There is only one objection to premise 1, and it can be made in two forms. First, the idea that our rational faculties are reliable can be challenged, and second, the idea that we must accept all initial sensory experiences as correct until proven otherwise can also be challenged. We could say rather that all initial sensory experiences should be questioned before acceptance. Now, it would be rather ridiculous to assert that our rational faculties are not reliable, seeing as this sort of extreme skepticism undermines argumentation altogether, as well as just about every field of knowledge. The second objection is equally as absurd, even if we say that at times our sensory experiences are not always correct and our rational faculties are only partially reliable. The reason for this is that the only way we know we are in error of something is when we experience that error. Say I am in a desert. I am walking along and I think I see water in the distance. Now, prior to this, I've never had any experience of a mirage, or never even heard of one. My initial sensory experience indicates that this is water. When I reach the area, I find that there is no water there and that it was an illusion. You see, in order for me to discover that this was an illusion, I could not have possibly thought of it as an illusion before thinking that it was real. In all other cases, prior experiences of our senses being incorrect are the only way we can believe that our senses or our rational faculties are not completely reliable. Hence, we must reject this objection as being a valid one. Now, there are two objections to premise 2. First, the claim can be made that an individual does not, in fact, have an initial experience of the universe being designed. Hence, such a counterclaim destroys the entire premise altogether. My counter to this is that in society, socio-psychological norms are established by the majority, not the minority. Even in science, consensus is reached through tests that can be verified by other parties, etc. But a person who is unable to understand how these tests are performed, or may have some other impediment, cannot participate in acknowledging qualifying evidence. A counter to this is that I am simply appealing to the majority and that this is fallacious reasoning, as the majority can be wrong at times. The problem with this is that if we are to believe that the majority of the human race is incorrect about what they seem to see, it needs to be proven as an illusion. Say if someone remarks that 99% of the world is under the influence of toxic gases that make you hallucinate. They need to provide evidence for this to that 99%. Remember, this argument is not about what is truly there, but what is truly experienced on the basis of our trust in our rational faculties, uninhibited by outside factors and that which is more rational to believe. On a side note, there are going to be those who claim that their understanding of science now allows them to see the universe as not designed. But this is highly questionable and can be easily countered as simply saying that your current understanding of the universe is merely a mistake in reasoning and was not your initial experience of the universe, since the argument is dealing with initial experiences. Premise 3 is where we will see the most contention. Note that before I go on, many theists will commonly cite the genetic fallacy against atheists who use the origin of the belief arguments as proof that theism is irrational. It is my belief that when the atheist brings up arguments against theist rationality by appealing to the belief's origins, they are perfectly justified in doing so. So rather than appeal to this fallacy, I will meet the objections head on. What should be the first obvious objection to premise 3, then, is evolution through natural selection. While I am an ardent believer in evolutionary theory, I obviously do not hold to the line of reasoning that evolution has proven that design is illusionary. The problem with this objection is that if one actually studies the theory, they will see that the amount of complexity and information necessary for it to create all the seemingly illusionary design in the universe requires just as much design in and of itself. Hence, to claim that evolutionary theory proves that our initial experiences of design in the universe are illusionary is actually false, and only takes the problem a step back. Thomas Nagel, a renowned atheist philosopher, agrees on this point, as linked in the info box. One could then appeal to an infinite series of evolutionary arguments, such as Dawkins has done in the God delusion, with the multiverse concept. Once again, this only brings the problem a step back further and doesn't actually explain why we still see design. If one is interested in the ontological problems with an infinite set of causes, I have provided links in the info box, one of which talks specifically about the first cause and time. But this argument is more concerned with explanations and justifications, not whether something truly exists. So instead, I will focus on why an infinite series of explanations is irrational. The reason such an explanation is irrational is because it undermines all explanations. To continuously add on to the series of explanations as justifications for one explanation only takes the problems back further, but never truly explains it. If we were to always appeal to infinite explanations, we would have no real explanations at all, since in order for one thing to be an explanation, it would have to be explained, and so forth and so on. Hence, we must, for the sake of justification, appeal to some sort of final explanation in the series. So such questions as, who designed the designer, are actually fallacious. Other than the fact that the question admits to their being design, it misses the very point of what constitutes an explanation at all. The second major objection to this premise is that humans anthropomorphize, and that on account of this, the universe as having design is merely our misfiring of this evolved ability for survival. Daniel Dennett explains that there are three stances regarding our view of the universe. 1, that there is a physical stance. 2, that there is a design stance. And 3, that there is an intentional stance. Each three stances helps us to understand the universe, but appealing to, say, stance 3 as opposed to stance 1 is more effective for survival in certain cases, such as when a bear is chasing you. It isn't helpful to know the chemical makeup of a bear when it's about to bite your face off. It's only helpful to know that it's running after you. Now, surprisingly, there is no mention of Stuart Guthrie's work, Faces in the Clouds, A New Theory of Religion, linked in the info box. Released prior to anything Dawkins or Dennett have authored on religion, which argues that all religion is anthropomorphism. Perhaps Dawkins and Dennett didn't see it as an important work, or perhaps as most of the new atheists these days, they aren't that educated on the subjects they talk about. The problem with this objection is that it assumes, without any evidence, that religion is a misfiring of the basic ability to apply purpose and intention to the world around us. It attacks the concept of universal anthropomorphism as being irrational only for the use of survival, yet at the same time sees some form of agent or passive anthropomorphism as correct, especially in dealing with the sciences or other forms of knowledge. While I agree that there are times where we anthropomorphize incorrectly in our understanding of the world, such as when we ascribe faces to clouds, this is because we are able to compare it with something else. The objection, then, that we anthropomorphize the universe is not an objection at all. Of course we anthropomorphize the universe. That's because that's how we understand the universe. What needs to be shown for this to be an objection is that we are anthropomorphizing the universe without justifiable reasons. The objections to premise 4 are perhaps the most fun to tackle, as we've heard some of them before. For instance, we've heard from skeptics that the designer may actually be aliens. The problem with this argument is that it assumes that something that is part of the universe can design the universe. This is nonsensical. Others may say the common satire, the universe was designed by the flying spaghetti monster, or some other imagined creature in an attempt to ridicule theistic belief, and show it to be ridiculous on account of lack of sufficient evidence. The problem with this objection is similar to the first, in that it claims that objects or entities from the universe are explanations for the universe. The atheist then may retort that the flying spaghetti monster is outside of the universe, and only takes the form of spaghetti when it comes into the universe. Well, so be it then. But then you'd be arguing for some sort of monism, which in fact makes you a theist. So the argument still prevails in that you've admitted that theism is more rational, and now you simply have to prove to us all that God is a flying spaghetti monster. Good luck with that. One could go on to suggest the absurd notion that a non-purposeful, non-intelligent agent designed the universe. But this doesn't make sense, since in order for the universe to be designed, it must have a designer. And in order for something to be a designer, it has to have intention and purpose. And finally, the old objection of God of the gaps. I truly believe that this will be one of the primary objections to this argument, that this is a gap-filling argument. But to the contrary, it isn't. In fact, it's quite the opposite. An argument for initial experience does not equate to filling any gaps. When one commits a God of the gaps fallacy, they are trying to explain something they do not understand by inserting God into the picture. This argument does not claim to know that God exists, nor is it inserting God into the picture. Rather, it is saying that the picture is what it seems to be, and that this is the most rational way to look at it. In conclusion, theism is the default position until proven otherwise. Thank you.